A big part of my career has been looking at the therapeutic value of the 12 steps, because the 12 steps really have harnessed some powerful psychological forces that creates an amazing change in our life. What is that change? Well, the truth is that the 12 steps are engineered to help us achieve emotional sobriety, to achieve true independence of spirit, to achieve autonomy, to learn how to take care of ourselves. These are things that we don't know. Emotional sobriety really helps us learn how to have a healthy relationship, how to have union with the preservation of our integrity, how to cooperate with integrity. Most of us get lost in our relationships. Most of us do a lot of things we don't want to do. We don't really know how to show up in a good way. Emotional sobriety is about learning to have healthy relationships.
Welcome, everyone, to our Thursday night workshop on emotional sobriety. We're looking at the chapter in Alan's most recent book on emotional sobriety. And the chapter we're looking at is entitled Living Life on Life's Terms. At age 74, there are still many mysteries to me about life, about myself, about other people, issues and parts of life that I want to understand more deeply. The first among those is how I got to be 74 years old so damn fast. But there are other ones as well. And one of those is that I don't understand nearly as well as I would like to. The concept, the attitude, and what I term the felt experience of humility. So I thought I would focus on humility this evening, hopefully in a way that will be helpful to each of you and will also advance my own understanding. There's an old adage that goes something like, if you want to learn more about something, teach it. And I'd like to learn all that I can about this very important aspect of emotional sobriety that we call humility. So what, you might ask, does humility have to do with living life on life's terms? In this chapter, Alan gives considerable attention, and rightfully so, to the power of our expectations to interfere with and undermine our ability to live life on life's terms, meaning to see and accept reality as it is and to make our choices accordingly. Accepting what is. It sounds so simple, right? But not at all easy to do in my experience, at least when reality does not line up with what I want it to be. Now, remember, I'm not saying that accepting what is means that we cannot change and cannot create change in ourselves and in the world, but rather that accepting reality, the reality of what is our starting point. Nathaniel Branden, the self-esteem theorist and psychotherapist you've heard us talk about a lot in this meeting, points out that we cannot address a problem we will not admit the existence of. And we cannot express a feeling or a thought that we won't allow ourselves to admit to and be aware of. As he put it in his books, The Six Pillars of Self-Esteem, accepting does not necessarily mean liking, enjoying, or condoning. I can accept what is true right here, right now, and be determined to change, to evolve from here. If the reality of my present, of the here and now, can be changed with time, then through my actions and choices, I can influence or make those changes. I can look for the resources I need within myself and outside of myself to make that happen. And if it's a reality that I have no ability to influence or to change, I can explore the possibility of changing my response to that reality, changing how I perceive it and the meaning I give it, and therefore become capable of changing my attitude, thoughts, feelings, and actions in response to the situation I'm in. I don't have to let that event or circumstance completely define me. Alan gives a wonderful personal example of this in the chapter. And for those of you who have the book, I encourage you to read it. Even when we are powerless to change the reality and need to go through a period of disorientation and fear and anger or confusion, out of that experience, great power can still reside within us to change our attitude and to mobilize a response. It's a shift in perspective that's needed. This can make all the difference between being lost in misery and fear and depression and hopelessness versus finding some measure of acceptance and peace. In addition to asking us to examine our expectations and their attendant demands that we place on reality, on life, on other people, and on ourselves, Alan talks about two traits or characteristics that are essential to the development of emotional sobriety: humility and the ability to, quote, roll with the punches, unquote, that life can and inevitably will hit us with. Humility, as I said, is the area I want to address with you here. Why is that? Because I believe that to the extent we are successful in cultivating an attitude, an orientation toward life of humility, even to a small degree, to that same degree, we will be less inclined to have excessive dependencies on others, unrealistic and unreasonable expectations of ourselves, of other people, of life, and fewer demands that life has to conform to our expectations. So I see a very, very strong tie between our ability to have a practice of humility, never perfect or even close, of course, but our ability to have some practice of humility in our lives and our ability to live life on life's terms. To the extent we have successfully cultivated the attribute of humility, we will not find ourselves in the position of being controlled by our inner king or queen baby, as Bill Wilson talked about it in the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions. That part is within each of us, the part that is self-centered, demanding, and the center of not just his or her own life, but who demands to be the center of others' lives as well, as Herb Kagan put it so well. Oh, our ego with the capital E will still show up, but our ability to deal with it much more effectively will grow as our humility grows. 3 points or caveats I want to make at the outset. I've given a lot of thought to the subject of humility over the course of my life, but each day in countless ways, I experience my own lack of humility. All the ways my own anxieties and insecurities lead me to gravitate toward arrogance and grandiosity, toward self-centeredness, and toward ego. With those parts of me controlling my thoughts, my feelings, my words, and my behavior. Every day I experience ways my need to see myself positively and to feel good about myself encourages me to ignore realities that conflict with those two desires. That tendency toward egocentrism is a very frequent companion for me, and I think for most of us in our daily lives. Second, please remember, as I talk about humility, the importance of self-acceptance, the importance of looking at ourselves with an attitude of curiosity, a desire to understand, and compassion, rather than judgment and condemnation. It is in our condemnation of parts of ourselves we experience and judge that we keep ourselves stuck in those very behaviors and experiences we want to change. My biggest fear in addressing any subject in our Thursday night meetings is that they will be turned by some of us into just more shoulds and ought to and perfectionistic ideals that we can then proceed to make ourselves wrong with. Please guard against that tendency. That's not what this is about. It's about learning, acceptance, and growth as we are. Third, keep in mind that we are each unique. We each differ from one another. So some things I say about humility will be much more applicable to some of us than to others. If I'm a person who learned growing up and came to believe that I should be seen and not heard, that I should always respect the wishes of others rather than my own, that I do not deserve to experience love or peace or achievement or happiness, an excess of arrogance and self-belief will not be my primary area of struggle in my life. If, on the other hand, I've learned to see myself as always right, to see my thoughts as the correct thoughts, to see other people as competitors rather than as sources of nurturing and companionship, there's a good chance I will be way overbalanced towards self-concern in my life, because that's what I learned growing up. And the comments I have to say about humility might be more applicable to me. In that situation, I may want to look seriously at a shift in the balance between concern for self and concern for others, a balance that at best is always very challenging to find in life. I want to look at shifting that balance more toward empathy, receptivity, vulnerability, and humility. So with these caveats in mind, what is humility? And how do we open ourselves to experience this virtue? Well, I invite you each first to think about humility in a personal way. What does it mean to you? What images or thoughts or even memories come to mind when you hear the word humility? Take a moment to reflect on that, each of us. Do you see yourself as a humble person? Or do you tend to see yourself more as an arrogant or prideful person? Do you see yourself as both at different times, or as neither? If you have behaved at times in a way that you've regarded as humble, what did you say that was part of that experience? What did you do? And how did you feel? See what comes to you about that. At moments in your life where you felt you were connected to humility, able to manifest some humility, how did you feel? What was your experience? What did you say, if you said anything? And was your experience of humility, when you've had it, if you've had it, one that you regarded as positive or negative? Did you like it or dislike it? These are some of the questions I ask my clients to think about. Their personal experience with and understanding of humility. With regard to how humility is defined, it's interesting. We can actually learn to understand what words mean by looking up what they mean. And we can understand what words mean by looking up the derivation, the origin of words. That's something we all learned in elementary school, but for most of my life, I haven't done a good job of remembering that. So often I settle for half-formed understandings or vague understandings of words that I hear or read, sometimes even words that I use. So I looked up humility, and a brief part of the definition that Merriam-Webster gave us is a definition in the negative. It says freedom from pride or arrogance. So it defines humility as a kind of freedom from other feelings and experiences. And as Herb Kagan has pointed out in the past, the word derives from a couple of Latin words called humus, which means earth or soil or ground, and humilus, which means low or slight. It's interesting to me that both the word humility, which today at least we commonly regard as a virtue, right? As something to be cultivated, grown in ourselves, and the root of the word humiliation are exactly the same. They refer to being down to earth, in the soil. I would add that for me, I've sometimes found the experience of humiliation, which for almost all of us we regard as a very negative experience, right? And the embarrassment that accompanies it, as some of my greatest teachers in my life, because those moments have forced me to look at how to better ground myself in my life and my experience, right? How to feel my center of focus and my center of being more within myself rather than so much outside of me. Often when I felt humiliation, it's been because I've been engaged in an effort of pretense or arrogance, when my false self has been rightfully humbled or called out. So to be humble is to be low, to be close to the earth, to be without pretense, or to use another common expression, to be grounded, to have my feet on the ground, as we say, rather than just having my head in the clouds. To expand on the concept of humility, remember Bill Wilson's words in the very letter that was read tonight. Emotional sobriety involves the development of much more real maturity and balance, parentheses, which is to say humility, in our relations with ourselves, with our fellows, and with God. So in Bill Wilson's view, humility is closely related to greater maturity and finding greater balance in our lives among all the conflicting parts of ourselves, between ourselves and other people, between ourselves and life itself. What else does humility mean? In this chapter, Alan draws on part of the American Psychological Association definition of humility when he writes, humility creates an experience of being right-sized. I really like that Alan landed on that term, an experience of being right-sized. In humility, he says, we have a low, reduced, and more realistic focus on self and acknowledge our limitations. low focus on self, and acknowledgement of our limitations, which means we surrender the idea that we have the right to impose our expectations on people, on circumstances, and even on life itself. So if we're trying to look at the question of humility versus arrogance or egocentrism, this is one of the things we can begin to look at. Do I sometimes operate as if I have a right to impose my expectations on other people, on circumstances, and even on life? And from my point of view, we all do that. It's just a question of how often. It's just a question of how much awareness we can develop around it. I like another definition that I found, a simple one, but I really like how it's worded. Humility is an attitude of spiritual modesty. Spiritual modesty that comes from understanding our place in the larger order of things. That comes from understanding my place, or for you to understand your place in the bigger picture of life, of family, of relationships, of work, of life on earth. A former dean of the Harvard Business School, a guy named Nitin Nohria, and I thought this was interesting. He talks about three areas of humility: intellectual, moral, and personal. And that we can help ourselves look at our own functioning in terms of humility by looking at these three areas. How do I do with humility in the area of intellect? Do I base a lot of my sense of self-esteem and self-worth on my intellect? Do I always tend to think that I'm right in the way that I'm thinking and other people are wrong? Do I tend to be dismissive, therefore, of others' viewpoints and their way of thinking? With regard to moral humility, he's talking about, as you would suspect, do I always make the assumption that I am morally in the right? That my views on right and wrong, good and bad, honorable and dishonorable are the correct views? Do I lose track of the fact that we are not perfect and our knowledge is not perfect and there's room for people to disagree? Do I lose track of the fact that perhaps my own views, very strongly held at different points in my life, have changed over the course of my life? And finally, personal humility is characterized by such things as a willingness to listen intently to others, a desire to understand the experience of others, also a willingness to acknowledge equally my accomplishments and my shortcomings, to receive compliments as well as criticism. It's manifested as an ability to not take the behavior of other people too personally, and not placing my sense of my own worth and value above that of others, or below that of others as a person. While these ideas and definitions are very helpful intellectually and can point us toward practical ways of looking at the practice of humility, there's still a great deal about humility that is hard to understand and mysterious, at least for me. There's paradox in humility. And I think this is very well expressed by Ben Franklin, of all people. Those of you who have been with us for a few years have heard me reference Franklin's writings on humility in his autobiography, published in 1791. And if you don't think anything written in 1791 can be relevant to our psychological and interpersonal struggles today, I beg to differ, at least if it's being written by a mind like Ben Franklin had. Franklin set about a self-improvement project and listed 12 virtues he wanted to consciously develop in himself, like temperance and order and moderation and industry. But in talking about his goals, and this is the interesting part, with a Quaker friend of his friend who knew Franklin well, suggested that Franklin might want to add humility to his list. It's a testament to Franklin's openness that upon reflection, he agreed that his friend was right. He could see that he was overly prideful, highly opinionated, closed off often to others' viewpoints, and so on. So his list of 12 virtues became 13. He decided to take one virtue per week and see what progress he could make. And at the end of his 13-week experiment, he reported that he believed he'd made significant progress with every virtue except one. You guessed it, humility. He noted that while he'd made considerable progress in successfully creating the appearance of humility in the way he spoke and how he presented himself, he felt he'd made no real progress at all in the internal attainment of humility. He also noted very insightfully that humility is an exceedingly difficult virtue to acquire, and that even if he had succeeded in doing so, he felt sure he would take pride in his humility. Think about that for a minute when I talk about the paradoxes of humility. This part of us that's always wanting to create a more positive image of ourselves in our own mind and in the minds of others, in my experience at least, is always at work inside our mind, inside our consciousness. One of the paradoxes that Nathaniel Branden talks about related to self-esteem that is also very applicable to humility. He writes, genuine self-esteem is not expressed through self-glorification at the expense of others, or by the quest to make oneself superior to others, or to diminish others so as to elevate oneself. Arrogance, boastfulness, and overestimation of our abilities reflect inadequate self-esteem, rather than, as some people might imagine, too much self-esteem. One of the most significant characteristics of healthy self-esteem is the state of a person who is not at war, either with himself or with other people. The same can be said of humility. That's why you've heard us talk about the idea of humility-based self-esteem in these workshops. I emphasize again our tendencies toward arrogance, toward over-focusing on ourselves to the exclusion of others, toward focusing on specific attributes we may possess and that we keep in the foreground of our mind in order to feel superior to other people, do not indicate genuine self-esteem, but rather a lack of self-esteem at a deep visceral level in terms of our sense of our own worth as a person. I'm aware of the time, and I want to give Alan and Tom an opportunity to share their thoughts. I'd like to go further next week, Alan, if that's okay with you, because I want to get into specific ways that we can help develop greater humility. And it doesn't start by judging our arrogance. It starts by becoming aware of our self-centeredness and arrogance and becoming more acceptance of it and taking more ownership of it. That's the initial step to becoming more humble from my perspective. So anyway, thank you all for your attention. And Alan and Tom, come on in.
Hey, that was great. And Man, you got me. You're good. You know, you're sneaky. You know, it's like I don't know if you do that on purpose, but you asked the question in the middle of all that. You and I, you know, we love to compare our humility, you know, and boast, you know, I'm my humility. No, you're no. Well, here's how we do it to fake our humility. Your humility is better than mine. No, yours is better than mine. And so you know it's hilarious, but it's like there's truth to what we're doing. But you asked the question: Are you these direct questions?
Say goodnight to you.
Do you consider yourself a humble person? I'm sitting here, you know, and going, fuck, you know, no, you know, of all the work that we've done, all the times we've talked about, it's like there is no way I answer that question yes if I characterize as a characterization. Do I have humility? Can I practice humility? Yeah, I can do all that. But when you said, and then you said, are you an arrogant or prideful person? Fuck. Yes. You know, I am. If I'm going to characterize myself, and I'm listening to the guys in my committee, the healthy ones that are telling me the same thing I would tell anybody else. It's like, you know, I'm not any one thing. Period. It's not either or. But that was an awakening moment for me, Roger. It's like, but it brings me to the other thing I made some notes about, and I think this is as much to do with what I've been doing today with clients as it is listening to you. But I'll try to plug it in here. It's like, and it's about I started thinking about when you were talking about don't turn what we talk about into shoulds. You know, it's about our expectations of ourselves. It's the you know, one of my favorite little nutshells that I keep handy for myself and for other people a lot, which is I respect your opinion. I trust my judgment. I respect respect means in respect, just in that case means I understand you're a separate person from me. You have your own perspective and it's not my perspective. And I trust my judgment. Now I can listen to you. I can ask for your opinion. I can ask for your input, and you can tell me something that I love so much that by the time the conversation is over, I can say that's my opinion. That's my judgment. Somebody would say, well, that's just what Roger said. Yeah, I want that one. You know, I accept that, but I also leave it open the possibility that I might say, I like part of that, but not all of it, and do my own thinking. So I, you know, so the way I'm connecting that in is what I've been talking to some clients about recently is expectation of ourselves, living life on life's terms. It's a practice. It's definitely not a destination. It's definitely not an accomplishment. It's and we're never, and this may sound negative, but it's not negative to me. Well, we're never finished. You know what I was telling a young woman yesterday that quit trying to finish. You know, and she has such a strong work ethic, and she, you know, perfectionistic, and definitely she knows that, and that's part of her recovery. But she just feels like she has to work on this stuff all the time, and you know, and I'm so grateful that I don't feel like that. And maybe I did at one point, but I don't feel that way. I mean, I'm you know, I'm good at spacing out, doing things I want to do, doing things just to enjoy that. And I see that as also part of the work of being the best version of myself. But anybody, all of you listening to this, anybody hearing it in the recording, you know, this is just ongoing practice. And what we want you to do, all of us, I can speak for all of us, is if we can contribute something to be thought provoking, that we, you know, that would be good. But be sure that you're taking your version of what we're talking about and putting it into practice. Now, if your version is exactly the same thing that Alan said one day, then that's it. You can own that. We don't offer, we offer this stuff freely. It's like if we say it and you want to, and I say this is what I think, or this is how I approach this, or how I believe it, and you like that, then have at it. But be sure that you're including yourself in that process of respecting other people's opinions and trusting, your own judgment. And this may be a little bit disjointed here, but the last thing I want to say is about roll. I love the part. I love Alan choosing the phrase "roll with the punches." It's just I see it almost like walking through a gauntlet. Life being like that, and learning to bob and weave and dodge and duck, and do what you got to do to get through. And to me, when I think about life on life's term and rolling with punches, I think this helps me. This makes life easier for me because it fits into my chosen belief that I'm here on earth to learn, and that makes succeeding so easy. Because first of all, if to learn something new, you have to have ignorance. I've got plenty. I've got lots. It's like, or you learn something new, you have to fuck something up. Plenty of material to work with, always. Now I'm not beating myself up either. I also believe we learn from doing things right by practicing doing something over and over and over and again right. But the idea of finally defining success is something that actually, and this is the humility part for me. You can tell me if you feel like this is part of humility, but the part of the humility is this is what makes it easy for me. And easy may not be the right word, but it's like more natural for me. If I'm here to learn, there is no way in the world I cannot succeed every single day of my life. I can learn something every single day. Now, and maybe that doesn't mean that I don't have the should monster in my head telling me at the end of the day, I'm saying I learned something, and he says, well, that doesn't matter because you're a piece of shit. It's like, okay, well, but the truth is I still learned something. Today tomorrow I may learn that I'm paying way too much attention to that should monster. But the idea is all I got to do is I get up, be the best version of myself, go through and learn some stuff. I'm not trying to become Mr. Emotional Sobriety. I'm not trying to get to the pinnacle. I'm not trying to be the oh, you want to know emotional sobriety, you check out Rutledge. It's like, and now that I say that sounds kind of funny, doesn't it, Roger?
I'm thinking of it for me is what I'm thinking of. It's like, yeah.
Yeah, but that's not my goal. I love the work we do with this stuff. I love the concept, and I'll say this: I don't even like the measurement when we say how's your emotional sobriety. I'm going like that's way oversimplified. That I go like that's a complicated answer, because emotional sobriety to me is a practice, and I can be doing, some days are better than others, and in some areas of my life I'm better than others. And so anyway, work in progress. Let it be easy sometimes. Don't make everything so hard. Watch out. Don't let your perfectionism or your really strong work ethic make your life in recovery harder than it needs to be.
Thank you, Tom.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Well, once again, Roger, I just love how methodical you go through these different issues that we talk about, and take a subject and just really elaborate on it and take a deep dive into our understanding of it. I do want to say this, Tom, I'm getting some direct messages that say that they want the YouTube information back in the chat room again, but I don't think you've been able to see that because they're sending them to me directly. So aside from that, Raj, really well done. Way to great job on digging into this whole thing, because it's such an essential issue that we bring humility to our relationship with our life. Bill talks about, that there's going to be real maturity and balance. He says humility in relationship to ourselves, our life. He says our relationship with the God of our understanding. And I would also add into it our relationship with the experiences we have in our life.
Yeah.
And, it's very interesting that one of the things that really gets in the way of us having an appropriate and honest relationship with reality is this idea that we hold a special status in life. While these things may be true for you, Tom, and for you, Roger, they really don't hold true for me. Now, it's very interesting, to stop and think, because as much as we would have that, what I would consider a very grandiose idea, right, that somehow I have special status and all the laws of the psychological laws that relate to life don't apply to me. There's another side of me, as you've said, Tom, that has what's that? The kind of reverse arrogance, where I think I'm the biggest, piece of crap in the room.
I'm worse than
I'm-
everybody.
I'm worse than everybody, and I don't deserve anything. So on the one hand, I claim special status. On the other hand, I don't feel like I deserve anything. It's like, talk about going insane. I mean,
either way, you're holding yourself special. That's
Well,
right.
That's true. See, that's
Yeah.
what people got to get. We are always making ourselves the most important thing. We're making it all about us all the time. And see, this is where we get really, really, if you will, caught and trapped in terms of our ability to respond in a healthy way to whatever challenges life is setting before us. Whatever challenges our person, our who we are, and how we've developed, and the conditioning we have, the programming we have, how that is now challenging me to live the life I want. Or what we talk about, Tom, a lot of times is which part of me is in charge, right?
Yeah.
Who's running
the show? Yeah, exactly.
Ernie Larson used to say, "Who's driving the bus?" I love that.
Yeah.
Who's driving the bus, man? Who do you have in that driver's seat? So this surrendering our special status is no small thing to do, is because in many ways we have developed, that has become a central part of our survival, our ability to ensure as much of our wholeness as we could from whatever challenges and traumas we had earlier on in our life. And so giving that up almost means that I'm going to give up. I love this analogy. I think I use it in the book somewhere, is that you're asking me to let go of my life preserver. This is the thing I've been holding on to. Yeah, it's pretty soggy. It's not working as good. I'm going under the waves a little bit with it. It's not working as good as it might have worked 30 or 40 or 50 or 70 years ago, as Kathy was saying. But it's the only life preserver I got. And until I get a new one, until I develop some new possibilities, it's a tough thing to let go of these things. And so this is where Tom's plea to us and encouragement to be compassionate, to be understanding that, look, we didn't get this way overnight, and we're not going to unravel all of these things overnight. It's going to take a slow, deliberate, disciplined practice to turn these things around. That's why we call emotional sobriety a practice, right? And at some point in time later on, after we're done with this, we're going to explore emotional sobriety as an art, right? The art of emotional sobriety, because it really takes very similar, commitment to that an artist makes to his work that we have to make to the work that we're doing in our emotional sobriety. So I'm so glad, Roger, that you brought this centerpiece to our discussion tonight. And yes, you can do next week. Why don't you continue on with
Sure.
this next week?
Love to. Yeah. Love
Probably
to.
need another week for my leg to heal anyway, from what I did today, man.
And next Thursday, we'll be up in Vermont.
That's right. We will be in Vermont, Tom, and we can do this sitting next to each other next week. Well, I think I see
Well,
that.
don't make me separate you two.
You might have to. All right, Tom, why don't you come in and join us? Is there anything you want to add to this?
Well, I do have quite a bit, and I don't want to, run over here too much, but, how much humility aligns with living life on life's terms, is, I didn't realize the importance of it until, you tied the two together in the book, right? It's like, yeah, I had humility. Yeah, I've been hearing life on life's terms, throughout my 12-step, recovery period. But, how closely they're aligned, really just made sense. Because if I find, my right path, my middle way, whatever you want to call it, through life, then I think I'm able to handle things a little bit better, right? Not perfect, as Tom says, and the compassion piece is so important. It's the best I could do with what I have in front of me at any given moment. So I really appreciate how that all ties together.
Does someone need to believe in God to successfully overcome addiction? Well, the way I like to think about what the program does, it connects us to who we really are. And what does that mean? Well, there's this incredible force in you and I, this growth force. It's the force that moved us from crawling to walking. You wanted to take those first steps. And when you fell, and you fell a lot of times, you didn't let your failures stop you. You picked yourself up, you learned from it. And how many times did you fail before you walked? You failed as many times as you needed to. You see that force, I call it a biological imperative, a psychological imperative, a spiritual imperative. It's moving you towards wholeness. It's moving you to be what you can be. Just like in the acorn is all the information it needs to become an oak tree. In you is all the information you need to become you. Become a you that can cope with life and to deal with whatever you need to deal with to be okay. And that's what I'll talk about in my new book, The 12 Essential Insights for Emotional Sobriety.